Okay, so I have this idea that I don't really think Avengers 5, if we can call it that, I don't really think Avengers 5 is going to be Secret Wars. I think it's going to be called Secret Wars, and I think it's going to borrow elements from Secret Wars, but I think it's going to be more in line with Avengers Forever. So let's do a little bit of explanation here so you know what I'm talking about, and then we'll get into how it is that I think this is going to unfold, combining these two things together. So let's talk about Secret Wars 2015, because that seems to be the on-running theory of which version of Secret Wars they're likely going to use. And a lot of that was really speculation going into Doctor Strange 2. Coming out of Doctor Strange 2 and the revelation of the existence of incursions, it's basically Secret Wars 2015 that it looks like they're drawing on here. So the way this whole thing worked going into Secret Wars is you had Jonathan Hickman's Avengers, New Avengers, best story ever told. But the reason why it's called that is because you had two different stories going at the same time. New Avengers dealt with the Illuminati directly, focusing on the incursions. Avengers was just a series of events that built up or helped to build up to a story arc called Time Runs Out. So the way it works is that where Avengers and New Avengers were telling separate stories, with Time Runs Out, you get an 8-month time skip. And basically, during Time Runs Out, it's everybody learning about the incursions, the collapse of the multiverse, all that kind of stuff, and essentially a coming together of the superhero community. And so one of the things that you had that went on there was a guy named Robert DaCosta, who was this super rich member of the X-Men, who basically was a billionaire, and he bankrolled something called the Multiversal Avengers. This was a ridiculously OP Avengers team. You had like Thor and Hyperion, who just between the two of them are more than enough to handle Thanos, to give you perspective. And then you had Starbrand, who is basically a guy that had as much power as he needed to defeat whatever villain he was facing off against, but that was the cap. So if he were to fight Galactus, he would have enough power to fight Galactus and no more than that. He was designed to just be a planetary protector. I know it's a MacGuffin, but it's still a cool concept. Like the Last White Event, that story was amazing. Oh my God, I loved it. But still, you had this really, really powerful team, and there were other people who were on it as well. But you had this really powerful team. Their job was to go into the multiverse and to find the Ivory Kings, right? The White Lords of Wild Space, who turned out to be the Beyonders. And of course, they all died. The last stand of Thor and Hyperion is one of the greatest moments in the history of comics. Dude, let me tell you something, man. You want to read a story where two ridiculously amazing characters go out guns blazing, right? I mean, it was the Battle of the Alamo is what this was. Literally, Thor's got one arm. He can't lift his hammer. Well, it's a hammer from a different universe, but he can't lift it. Hyperion is basically blind. His eyes were gouged out of his head. So literally these guys, it's the last stand. And like the Beyonders come pouring out of the Beyondverse, and it's just Thor and Hyperion. And these guys are just guns blazing, right? And it's like this amazing description, right? It's like in the bleak cold nothingness of space, two gods stood against many. There was a crack of thunder, something else, and then silence. And it was just like, damn! Yeah, it was just this ridiculously amazing moment. It was just crafted so perfectly. But of course, again, they all basically ended up dying. But I want you to keep that idea of the multiversal Avengers in mind, because we'll circle back around to that here in a little while. But then you go into Avengers Forever. Now, Avengers Forever was a story that was written in the late 1990s and was in a lot of ways a huge influence for the Loki TV series. Not exactly, right? There were massive differences between Avengers Forever and the Loki TV series. However, the Avengers Forever storyline essentially dealt with like Immortus, He Who Remains, essentially in the Loki TV show, Kang the Conqueror, the Timekeepers, that kind of stuff. So you can see the huge similarities that were being drawn on there. But the big significance about Avengers Forever is that it was basically a story that saw the Avengers or members of the Avengers, so like Captain America, Hank Pym, Hawkeye, people like that, basically being yanked out of different time periods and coming together and working together as a singular team in order to defeat like the Timekeepers, and actually Kang worked alongside them, different things like that. Now, the reason why I say all of that matters is because if you look at Doctor Strange 2, this had huge revelations. One of the first things this revealed to us is that there are other universes out there where groups like the Illuminati or any number of groups out there are seemingly aware of the multiverse, much more so than anybody in the main Marvel Cinematic Universe was. The only experience Stephen Strange had as Sorcerer Supreme with the multiverse was the experience he got at the hands of the Ancient One in the first Doctor Strange movie, and then the spell he cast in Spider-Man No Way Home. and like Doctor Strange 2. That's it. Like quite literally in terms of like the multiverse, where Stephen Strange has just now opened his front door and is stepping outside. Presumably when you look at the Illuminati, they've been walking around outside for a long time. They're well aware of the multiverse, right? And so you have to assume that in other realities, people know more about the multiverse than basically the Marvel Cinematic Universe does, right? Like, we're literally the last ones to figure it out. And so you have to believe that if that's the case, the events of Loki ring true, and what you have now is Kang the Conqueror at the end of time instead of He Who Remains, and Kang is basically conquering the multiverse, or at least maybe it already conquered it, and now that the sacred timeline, the sacred multiverse, as we can call it, has rejoined the rest of the multiverse, now it all falls under the control of Kang. You have to believe there are other universes and groups of people out there who are aware of it. Now, the question that would really have to be asked here is just right off the bat, were the Illuminati aware of Kang the Conqueror? Did they know about Kang the Conqueror? I don't know the answer to that question. It was never even hinted at or alluded to in any form or fashion. It's not like we saw Iron Lad, who's basically Kang the Conqueror before he becomes Kang the Conqueror, working as a superhero to try to keep himself from becoming Kang the Conqueror. It's not like we saw him. As far as I'm aware, there were no references to Kang, the existence of Kang, the events of Loki, or anything like that. So we don't necessarily know if they knew. I would assume they did. Maybe they were working on it behind the scenes, but the immediate threat was what was going on with Doctor Strange and like creating incursions, things along those lines. The circumstances didn't present an opportunity to talk about Kang the Conqueror. So it would just be injecting information in there that's not necessary, if for no other reason than to give us, the audience, an indication that like the Illuminati know about Kang the Conqueror. So if we assume they did know, we can also assume other groups around the universe, around the multiverse know, which begs the question, are there any groups out there that are fighting off against the forces of Kang? That unless Kang is just sitting at the end of time, watching the multiverse unfold, then he's got to be doing something, right? Whether it's meddling with a time stream or something like that. Are there groups out there working against him? And so ultimately, I think that's what Avengers 5 would in effect be. That the Illuminati and Doctor Strange 2 basically gave us our first glimpse into the idea that there are organized superhero teams that exist out there in the multiverse that are composed of some pretty heavy hitters. If we add in the caveat that they are aware of Kang, we also have to add in the caveat some of them are fighting against Kang. And so what I think would happen when it came to like the Avengers 5 Secret Wars / Avengers Forever type film is we would basically get a coming together of a handful of superheroes and groups, some of which may be identical. So one version of Iron Man, right, we get like Robert Downey Jr. who returns as Iron Man by some weird circumstance. I don't know, they pluck him out of time or something like that. But then we finally get Tom Cruise's superior Iron Man from some other reality. We get Tobey Maguire, we get Andrew Garfield, we get Tom Holland, right? Even if nobody knows who Peter Parker is in the main Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? We get him back or something like that. Maybe Stephen Strange casts a spell where only he and everybody else there knows, right? Whatever the case is, we basically get that return, but we get those heroes plucked out from different realities. Now, here's the thing about this. If they went in this direction, this is not a one movie gimmick. You can't do this in one film. If you did, it would baffle the hell out of people, or the movie would have to be like 4 hours. It's way too much to cram in. So I could see them doing this as a 2-part film or as a phase, right? Like some kind of a phase, like a series of events. I mean, we already know from the end of Doctor Strange 2 with Clea grabbing Stephen Strange that the idea of incursions is affecting the dark dimension, right? It's infecting other realities or, other places that require him to be involved. Those kind of little post-credit scenes, those small little buildups are a great way to segue that information in so that by the time you get to Avengers 5, whether it's because of previously existing films that have added like a broad scope of all this information, or just post-credit scenes and movies that kind of piece it all together, that people go into that movie knowing exactly what to expect. Basically, you got the prologue, right? You got the exposition in terms of what's happening by way of other movies and post-credit scenes. I think at this point in the MCU, right, if this was in the era, like in the first 10 years or even the first 5 years, I'd say, no, that's a bit of a stretch. But I think at this point in time, post-credit scenes are so widely acknowledged and they're so often remembered by people who see those movies that you can get away with treating them as like information that you essentially need to understand what comes next, because they're so ingrained in the MCU. I mean, even now, right? I mean, you can't tell me with a straight face when you were watching Moon Knight that you were just waiting for a mid-credits or a post-credits scene, right? It's a core part of the MCU. So I could see them leaning into that and saying, okay, like we need this. And even if it's something that people forget, we have the whole internet at our disposal, right? It's non-stop articles when movies start coming out, right? Remember this post-credit scene? Remember that post-credit scene? So I could see them pulling something off like this. But what it does is it solidifies the role of Kang. It solidifies the significance of Kang. That what this is, in terms of it living up to the namesake of a secret war, is it quite literally is that. It's a war that's being fought that not everybody is aware of, right? It quite literally is a secret war being fought in the multiverse against Kang the Conqueror, because most people don't know it's happening. The average person walking around in their life has no clue that the multiverse even exists, let alone a guy at the end of it all is the one ruling and manipulating everything, right? Like it's pretty much a secret, but it also brings in that Avengers Forever type idea where you get different superheroes who are brought in from other realities that are all basically aiding in this fight against Kang. And it would be pretty massive in scale. I mean, you're talking about a pretty huge conflict, right? I mean, let's take, for example, the events of Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, right? Remember like the battle in Wakanda? Let's take that battle and extrapolate it out. And let's say that they basically copied Infinity, which is where that battle is based off of. Let's say they copied the Infinity storyline by Jonathan Hickman, where you have a fight in Wakanda and a fight in New York and a fight in Atlantis and a fight in upstate New York at the in Westchester at the Xavier Institute. You have like 5 battles all happening at the same time as part of this greater war, which is Thanos essentially invading the Earth. Now, expand that out, and you've got a conflict happening in this universe and that universe and an alternate universe, and it's not that unreasonable. Literally, Avengers Endgame was a movie where we watched groups of people doing different things in different time periods. It's not a hard concept to keep up with, and I honestly, I think most people could handle it. Most people could follow it. They would be like, yeah, I mean, I can keep up with this. I think a couple movies is necessary, like a 2-part movie is necessary there in order to really grasp the significance of it all. Otherwise, you would rush through too much, and the gravity of the situation would be lost on the moviegoer because things are just happening so fast. You don't really have enough time to absorb everything. But I think this is entirely possible, and I think this may most likely be the direction that they're heading in, that it is Kang, but it's basically a combination of Secret Wars and Avengers Forever. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments section, right? I mean, do you guys think this is entirely possible, that we're looking at just alternate reality teams banding together to face off against Kang the Conqueror as a singular team? Or do you think it'll be something different? Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.